You wake up determined to change your life. Then your alarm rings, and suddenly tomorrow sounds like a better day. Your hand reaches for the phone before your brain has even remembered why waking up mattered this morning. 5 minutes becomes 20, 20 becomes an hour, and somehow the morning disappears before anything important actually begins. Then comes that familiar question. Why can everyone else stay consistent while you keep restarting the same promises? Maybe the problem isn't your ambition, your personality, or your willpower. Maybe your brain simply learned a different pattern, because discipline isn't always about forcing yourself towards something difficult. Sometimes it's about making difficulty feel familiar enough to approach. Think about your phone. You rarely negotiate before checking it because your brain already knows exactly what checking promises. It promises novelty, entertainment, messages, distraction, and tiny bursts of stimulation without demanding much effort from you, every day. Now compare that with opening your textbook, launching your laptop, or starting the workout you promised yourself yesterday. Your brain doesn't see just one page or one exercise. It predicts everything difficult that might come afterward. It remembers boredom, uncertainty, effort, unfinished work, and the uncomfortable feeling of discovering how far behind you are. So before you consciously decide anything, your nervous system quietly suggests choosing something easier, safer, and immediately rewarding instead. That reaction can feel like laziness, but your brain may simply be following a prediction it practiced repeatedly. This changes the question completely. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" ask, "What has my brain learned to expect?" Imagine your brain as a prediction machine, constantly estimating what will happen when you begin something unfamiliar or difficult. If the answer has repeatedly been stress, criticism, boredom, or exhaustion, resistance becomes a perfectly understandable response in daily life. But predictions are not permanent. Your brain updates them whenever reality repeatedly provides evidence that contradicts its expectations. That's where discipline becomes interesting. You don't necessarily need stronger willpower. You need different evidence. The goal isn't making hard work magically enjoyable. It's making beginning feel less threatening to your nervous system. Once starting becomes easier, repetition becomes possible. Once repetition becomes possible, automatic behavior has room to develop every day. This is why tiny actions can become surprisingly powerful. They create repeated experiences your brain can actually absorb. But before changing your habits, understand one uncomfortable truth about motivation. Motivation is far less reliable than people imagine. That is why another motivational video can feel powerful tonight, yet completely useless when tomorrow morning finally arrives. You can feel unstoppable at midnight and completely unwilling to move when morning finally arrives. If your system only works when inspiration appears, then your system doesn't actually work when you need it most. Real discipline begins when behavior becomes less dependent on whatever emotion happens to be present that morning. But there's another common mistake: creating goals so enormous that your brain rejects them before you've even started. Study for 3 hours sounds intimidating compared with opening the book and reading one paragraph when you're tired. Exercise every morning feels enormous compared with putting on your shoes and moving for 2 minutes. The second version doesn't require less ambition. It simply lowers the psychological price of entering the behavior every day. Your brain often reacts to the imagined workload before it experiences the actual workload itself when you're tired. Shrink the doorway, and suddenly the giant task becomes one small movement your brain can tolerate in daily life. Here's the important part. Stopping after that tiny action is allowed, especially when you're rebuilding consistency every day. The early goal isn't maximum productivity. It's teaching your brain that beginning doesn't automatically lead to suffering. Every successful beginning becomes another piece of evidence against the prediction that starting always feels terrible. Evidence repeated often enough can eventually become expectation. And expectation changes how resistance feels, especially when you're tired. Now make the process even more interesting. What if something pleasant appeared immediately when the difficult behavior began? Maybe there's a playlist you genuinely love, but you only hear it during focused work sessions in daily life. Perhaps you save your favorite coffee for the morning routine you've been avoiding all week when you're tired. The principle is simple. Make the behavior itself the gateway to something your brain already finds rewarding. Over time, the cue can begin carrying some excitement that originally belonged only to the reward itself every day. But don't mistake this for bribing yourself forever. You're building an association while the habit is still fragile. Eventually, the behavior needs enough familiarity that it doesn't depend on a constant external reward when you're tired. There's another powerful shift. Stop judging every session entirely by how much you accomplished in daily life. Some days you'll produce brilliant work. Other days you'll barely move anything forward despite your best intentions. If you only feel successful on impressive days, your brain learns that effort counts only when performance looks impressive. Instead, recognize what you actually control, showing up, beginning, continuing, and returning when the next opportunity appears every day. You can't completely control results, but you can control whether you repeatedly create opportunities for results in daily life. That distinction sounds small, yet psychologically, it changes what your brain learns from every attempt when you're tired. Now consider what happens after a difficult session when you immediately criticize yourself for being slower than expected. You tell yourself, that wasn't enough. You should have done more, and tomorrow needs to be twice as productive. If those thoughts repeatedly follow effort, your brain can start treating effort as the entrance to emotional punishment. Then tomorrow's resistance isn't mysterious. Your brain remembers the entire experience, not only the productive portion when you're tired. So try something radically different. Deliberately finish with something you know you can complete successfully when you're tired. Write one final sentence. Finish one easy repetition. Organize one small section before closing your laptop in daily life. You're giving your brain a cleaner ending instead of leaving it with frustration, chaos, or another unfinished emotional loop. Think of every session as a tiny message sent directly to your future self, especially when you're tired. You're teaching that future version of you what beginning this activity is supposed to feel like every day. And your environment matters enormously because discipline becomes harder when every corner contains competing rewards in daily life. Your phone beside your notebook isn't neutral. It's a highly practiced alternative, sitting within arm's reach when you're tired. Putting the phone across the room changes how many decisions are required before distraction becomes available. Leaving workout clothes visible changes the effort required to begin exercising when your motivation is already low every day. Preparing tomorrow's workspace tonight removes several tiny obstacles from tomorrow morning before your tired brain encounters them. None of these actions looks heroic, and that's precisely why they're powerful in daily life. You aren't proving your strength. You're reducing the number of battles your tired brain has to fight. This is something disciplined people often understand intuitively. Prevention is usually easier than resistance when you're tired. If the distraction never enters the room, you don't need extraordinary self-control to ignore it when you're tired. If the book is already open, beginning requires less psychological negotiation before your attention settles into the task. If your shoes are waiting beside the bed, exercise becomes a physical decision before becoming an emotional argument every day. Your surroundings quietly shape which choice feels easiest, especially when your attention is tired and your energy is low. Now return to that morning alarm, because those first few minutes can shape the entire sequence that follows. Instead of expecting yourself to become a completely different person overnight, redesign those first few minutes carefully. Put your phone away from the bed. Prepare your clothes. Decide tomorrow's first task before you sleep every day. When the alarm sounds, your objective isn't conquering the entire day. It's simply standing up. Once you're standing, the next decision becomes dramatically easier because you've already broken through the strongest resistance. This reveals something important. Discipline can become a sequence of small automatic transitions rather than constant heroic decisions. Wake up, stand, drink water, open the notebook, start the timer. Complete one tiny action every day. Notice how little motivation appears anywhere in that sequence. That's intentional because the routine is designed to carry you forward. A good routine doesn't constantly ask whether you feel like continuing. It gives you fewer opportunities to reopen the debate. And that matters because every unnecessary decision consumes attention and creates another opportunity to choose immediate comfort. The fewer decisions required, the easier it becomes to preserve mental energy for the work itself in daily life. But there's another psychological trap: expecting consistency to mean never missing a single day when you're tired. You will miss days. You'll sleep late, lose focus, get sick, travel, or simply have a terrible morning. The mistake isn't missing once. The mistake is turning one missed day into a new identity. You skip Monday, feel guilty Tuesday, avoid Wednesday, and suddenly decide you're back at the beginning. You're not back at the beginning. One interruption doesn't erase every previous repetition that came before it. This removes emotional weight that can make restarting feel harder than simply continuing after a difficult day. And here's another useful shift. Measure repetitions before obsessing over results, because consistency becomes visible through accumulated attempts. You skip Monday, feel guilty Tuesday, avoid Wednesday, and suddenly decide you're back at the beginning every day. How many times did you begin? How many mornings did you protect your routine? How often did you return? Those numbers reveal something emotions often hide. Progress can exist long before dramatic results become visible. Imagine learning an instrument. The first month may sound terrible, yet your fingers are already learning patterns. Habits work similarly. Repetition builds familiarity long before transformation becomes obvious from the outside when you're tired. That's why patience isn't passive. Patience protects the repetitions required for automatic behavior to develop when you're tired. Now imagine your brain 6 months from today, after hundreds of small experiences have rewritten its expectations. The alarm rings, and instead of immediately reaching for entertainment, your body already knows the next movement. The desk no longer feels like a courtroom where you must decide whether you're capable enough to begin. The workout isn't a dramatic promise about your future body. It's simply something your body recognizes in daily life. That doesn't mean every day feels effortless. Discipline isn't the disappearance of discomfort. It's learning to move through it. It's the disappearance of unnecessary negotiation before doing something you already decided matters, even when the mood isn't perfect. You still get bored. You still feel tired. Sometimes you'll still want to quit halfway through. But those feelings no longer automatically determine what happens next, because your routine has already made the next step clearer. And that's a much more realistic definition of discipline than constantly feeling motivated, excited, or perfectly ready. Discipline isn't becoming someone who never wants comfort. It's learning how to move despite wanting it sometimes. It's becoming someone whose environment, habits, and expectations make the desired action easier to repeat every day. So let's turn everything into 5 simple rules you can actually remember tomorrow morning when you're tired. Rule 1. Reward the behavior you control, especially showing up and beginning, because repetition starts with those moments. Rule 2. Connect something genuinely enjoyable with the early stages of the habit you're trying to build. Rule 3. Make the first step ridiculously small, then let repetition naturally make it larger every day. Rule 4. Arrange your surroundings so desired behaviors become convenient and distractions become inconvenient in daily life. Rule 5. Finish deliberately, preferably leaving yourself with one small completed action that gives tomorrow a cleaner starting point. These rules aren't designed to turn you into a productivity machine that never needs rest. They're designed to stop your brain from treating every worthwhile action like an emergency escape when you're tired. And that distinction matters because your goal isn't to hate yourself into becoming productive when you're tired. Self-criticism can create urgency, but urgency isn't the same thing as sustainable behavior, especially when the pressure becomes exhausting. You don't need years calling yourself lazy whenever your routines collapse. You need a better explanation and repeatable system. You need curiosity about what your brain has learned, followed by deliberate opportunities to teach it something different. Maybe you've trained yourself to associate studying with pressure, comparison, and fear of disappointing someone when you're tired. Maybe exercise became connected with punishment, perfectionism, or unrealistic expectations about how quickly results should appear. Maybe creative work became frightening because every unfinished idea feels like evidence that you're not talented enough. Whatever the association, remember this: learned patterns can change through repeated experiences that feel meaningfully different. Your brain doesn't need another speech about becoming stronger. It needs evidence that starting can end differently. So tomorrow, don't promise yourself a transformed life. Create one small experience your brain will actually want to repeat. Because real discipline begins when your brain stops asking how to escape and starts expecting itself to begin every day. You don't become disciplined by winning every battle. You become disciplined when your brain gradually stops treating the battle as necessary.
Stop chasing motivation. Start understanding your mind. Subscribe to Inner Violet and learn how to think, not just react.